On the 31st of January 1943, the 52-year-old Field Marshal Friedrich Wilhelm Ernst Paulus was taken prisoner by the Soviets. For him, and for tens of thousands of other men, the Battle of Stalingrad was over. As for how this happened, I shall let the then 49-year-old Colonel Wilhelm Adam explain from his diary. 0700. It was still dark, but the day was dawning almost imperceptibly. It was some time before I could break out of the maze of thoughts and strange dreams that had depressed me so greatly. I don't think I remained in this state for very long. I was going to get up quietly when someone knocked at the door. Paulus awoke and sat up. It was the HQ commander. He handed the Colonel General a piece of paper and said, "Congratulations. The rank of Field Marshal has been conferred upon you. The dispatch came early this morning." It was the last one. One can't help feeling it's an invitation to suicide. However, I'm not going to do them such a favour, said Paulus after reading the dispatch. Arthur Schmidt continued, "At the same time I have to inform you that the Russians are at the door." And with these words he opened the door, and a Soviet general and his interpreter entered the room. The general announced that they were his prisoners. I placed my revolver on the table. "Prepare yourself for departure. We shall be back for you at 0900. You will go in your personal car," said the Soviet general through his interpreter. Then they left the room. I had the official seal with me. I prepared for my last official duty. I recorded Paulus's new rank in his military document, stamped it with the seal, and then threw the seal into the glowing fire. The main entrance to the cellar was closed and guarded by the Soviet soldiers. An officer, the head of the guards, allowed me and the driver to go out and get the car ready. Climbing out of the cellar, I stood dumbfounded. Soviet and German soldiers, who just a few hours earlier had been shooting at one another, now stood quietly together in the yard. They were all armed, some with weapons in their hands, some with them over their shoulders. My God, what a contrast between the two sides. The German soldiers, ragged and in light coats, looked like ghosts with hollow, unshaven cheeks. The Red Army's fighters looked fresh and wore warm winter uniforms. Involuntarily, I remembered the chain of unfortunate events which had prevented me from sleeping for so many nights. The appearance of the Red Army soldiers seemed symbolic. At 9 o'clock sharp, the HQ commander of the 6th Army arrived to take the commander of the vanquished German 6th Army and his staff towards the rear. The march towards the Volga had ended. Paulus was then driven in his own car to the Don Front headquarters near Zarykino, 80 kilometers from Stalingrad. He was first interrogated by the Soviet Army Command, led by the future Marshal of the Soviet Union, Konstantin Rokossovsky, on the 2nd of February 1943 at 1600 hours. He vehemently denied that the Southern Pocket had surrendered, insisting that the fighting had been halted solely due to a lack of ammunition. If you ask me, this is a bit like the difference between surrendering and giving up. Nonetheless, it was clearly important to Paulus. Furthermore, despite repeated requests, he refused to order the still fighting northern pocket of Stalingrad to cease hostilities. He stated that he'd no command authority over it because he wasn't with the troops. As it happened, it didn't make any difference. Around this time, the northern pocket was about to surrender. On the 20th of February 1943, Paulus and his staff were transferred to prisoner of war camp number 27 at Krasnogorsk near Moscow, where they stayed for 6 weeks before being moved on to camp number 160 at Suzdal. Since their capture, the officers of the Stalingrad army were subject to secret surveillance by the NKVD, which regularly compiled dossiers on their political views. In mid-May 1943, it was reported that Paulus was trying to maintain his composure and expected to be exchanged for a Russian general at the first opportunity. Furthermore, he continued to greet his officers with Heil Hitler and rejected the socialist May Day celebrations. Wilhelm Pieck was a German communist. He'd worked in Moscow for the German-language propaganda station Radio Moscow since the beginning of the invasion. In 1943, he was one of the initiators of the National Committee for a Free Germany. He visited the officers in order to talk to them about it. Paulus was happy to talk to him, unlike most of the officers, who showed Pieck nothing but contempt. In this conversation he admitted his disappointment with Hitler, but insisted that, as a soldier, he had to obey orders under all circumstances. He thus firmly refused to contribute to the founding of the committee. After being transferred to POW Camp 511048 in Voikovo in July 1943, Paulus, as the highest-ranking officer, had to act as a mediator in disputes between the group of soldiers willing to collaborate with the NKFD, the National Committee for a Free Germany, and the other camp inmates. Furthermore, he was pressurized by Seydlitz, whose superior he'd been in the Stalingrad pocket, to participate in the founding of the NKFD, as the participation of such a highly decorated soldier was expected to send a strong signal. Paulus justified his refusal by pointing out that as a prisoner of war he was not allowed to take a stand against his political superiors. He did, however, sign a declaration accusing the members of the League of German Officers, the BDO, of treason. Nonetheless, he was later to join this organization. The League of German Officers, the BDO, was founded on the 11th to 12th of September 1943 by 95 German officers in the Lunyovo prisoner of war camp near Moscow. The aim of the organization was to cooperate with the Soviet Union in order to preserve the German Reich after its anticipated defeat. It was led by General of Artillery Walter von Seydlitz-Kurzbach. It called upon German soldiers to defect and fight against the Hitler dictatorship through leaflets and radio broadcasts. It might have influenced some German soldiers to surrender or work with the Soviets. However, it did very little to persuade Stalin. It soon merged with the National Committee for a Free Germany. The Soviet authorities persisted in their efforts to persuade Paulus and transferred him without his escort to Zarechen near Moscow. The pressure on the Field Marshal increased. He was only allowed contact with BDO members who, along with his Soviet guards, urged him to join that organization which he'd considered treasonous. Paulus complained that he did not share the opinion of his fellow prisoners, not out of narrow-mindedness, but because he felt incapable of making a decision on the matter. He was therefore taken back to Voikovo on the 20th of July 1944. That very day there was an assassination attempt on Hitler, and as a result he was again subjected to pressure for 2 weeks until he agreed to cooperate. The final straw for him, he said, was the severing of diplomatic relations between Germany and Turkey, which would lead to an Allied landing in the Balkans, thus rendering the war lost for Germany. On the 8th of August 1944, he signed an appeal to the German people, calling on them to renounce Hitler. The prolonged hesitation of Paulus and eventual shift to the Soviet line only provoked outrage amongst the BDO and other German prisoners of war. The BDO members maintained that Paulus could not hold a leadership position, as his indecisiveness had undermined his credibility. His move also caused consternation abroad, since Paulus had followed Hitler's orders unconditionally and to the very end. In Germany, his family members were taken into custody under the principle of Sippenhaft. Sippenhaft was collective punishment for the entire family. It had been applied in Nazi Germany since July 1933. Collective punishment usually meant internment in a concentration camp. In the case of Paulus, his wife, daughter and his daughter's son, born in 1942, were sent to Dachau, while his son was imprisoned in the Immenstadt fortress in southwestern Bavaria in the Allgäu region. Paulus probably overestimated his influence and attempted to persuade other officers to join him. He assembled a new staff. 2 appeals to Army Group North and the newly formed 6th Army to lay down their arms proved fruitless. On the 30th of October 1944, he asked Stalin for a meeting to propose the formation of German volunteer units comparable to the Russian liberation established on the German side under Andrei Vlasov. Given the lack of success and significance of the NKFD and the BDO, both amongst German prisoners of war and those who were still fighting, it was probably no surprise to anyone that his request went unanswered. After the end of the war, the announcement of the trials against the major German war criminals in November 1945 caused great unrest amongst the prisoners and war officers who had fought Stalingrad. One charge concerned the killing of 40,000 civilians in the Stalingrad area. Paulus's subordinates denied any responsibility for this and pointed to him as their superior. This may have prompted him to cooperate with the Soviet Union. He'd made it clear to the NKVD liaison officer that he wanted to testify about the preparations for the invasion of the Soviet Union and the knowledge of the General Staff. Under the codename Satrap, Paulus was flown to Germany in early 1946 and appeared in court on the 11th of February 1946 as a witness for the prosecution under Soviet protection.
Will you repeat this oath after me? I swear by God,
Ich schwöre bei Gott,
the Almighty and Omniscient,
dem Allmächtigen und Allwissenden,
that I will speak the pure truth
dass ich die reine Wahrheit sagen
and will withhold and add nothing.
dass ich nichts verschweigen und nichts hinzusetzen werde.
Would you like to sit down?
Thank you very much for listening to this video. In the next part, we'll have a look at the testimony of Paulus at Nuremberg. The video shows his testimony in full and it's done in the same order as he was asked questions, so it does tend to jump around a bit, as it did at Nuremberg. Paulus shines a bit of light above all on the planning for Barbarossa and his behaviour at Stalingrad. And a video after that will look at his life after Nuremberg and how he finally returned home to Germany, or by this time it was East Germany, so it really wasn't his home. I have done quite a lot of videos related to Nuremberg, Second World War in general, but above all my specialisation is in the Holocaust. I always upload at 2000 hours Central European time as I live in Poland and Germany. I try to be present when the videos premiere, which gives you a chance to chat to me and other users in real time. These videos feature original research as I can speak various languages. I also offer channel membership, which costs £5 or €6 or $6, and this gives access to currently more than 800 videos which are for members only. So if you're interested in real researched history made from the locations where these things happened without the use of sensationalized, horrific language or AI slop, then this is the place to be. For the moment, bye for now.